The Galactic Empire stretched across 1,000 star systems, convinced of its own permanence. To its governors and admirals, humanity was a footnote, a small, resourceful species tucked away in fringe colonies, barely worth acknowledging. The Empire's doctrine was simple. Minor civilizations were to be cataloged, taxed, and disciplined when convenient. It was this arrogance that led an Imperial patrol to sweep through an obscure human sector, hunting smugglers and troublemakers, unaware that a single mistake would light a fire they could not contain. The capture was swift and uneventful. A family afore living on a quiet agricultural moon was taken without resistance. Imperial Marines descended from orbit, sealed the homestead, and transported their prisoners onto a carrier ship with the efficiency of a well-drilled machine. No shots fired, no alarms raised, no sign that this family was anything more than provincial settlers. Their records showed no criminal activity. Their faces betrayed no fear. What the Empire never bothered to check, buried under layers of encryption in human military archives, was the true identity of the father. Marcus Hale, the man once called a ghost of Titan War, a strategist whose campaigns against rival human factions and alien raiders had reshaped entire battle doctrines, a man whose name once silenced war rooms. But to the Empire's junior officers, he was just another human farmer, calloused hands and weathered skin, unremarkable in every visible way. Inside the transport bay, the family was processed with mechanical indifference. Standard scans, restraint bands, and separation protocols. The wife and 2 daughters were led down one corridor, Marcus down another, all under the sterile glow of Imperial lighting. The guards sneered at the silence of their captives. To them, fear was natural. They expected begging, protests, emotional collapse. Instead, the humans moved as if following an invisible script, each glance and pause deliberate. Marcus observed everything, not with his eyes alone, but with his ears, his memory, his intuition sharpened by years of covert campaigns. The cadence of boot steps on the deck, the hum of engines cycling to hyperspace, the faint ozone bite of the carrier's reactor. Every detail was stored, mapped, and weighed. He knew how many seconds passed between corridor patrols. He measured the distance between bulkhead doors by counting his breaths. He even listened for the subtle change in air pressure when the ship's internal security field cycled, all without appearing to notice. The guards laughed at his calmness, mistaking it for weakness. They mocked his wife's silence and the stoicism of his daughters. What they could not see was discipline born of blood and war. These were not ordinary civilians. Every family member had been taught, in their own quiet way, to recognize patterns, to remain still under pressure, to trust Marcus signals. Even in captivity, they were a unit. In the bowels of the Imperial carrier, Marcus lay on a metal bench, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling panels vibrated every 33 seconds, a signature of the carrier's gravity modulation system. He smiled faintly. Somewhere deep in his memory, he recalled the schematics of similar vessels captured in past conflicts. Nothing was identical, but everything had weaknesses. And if there was one thing Marcus Hale excelled at, it was finding cracks in armor, no matter how small. The Empire congratulated itself. Another sweep, another group of settlers detained for inspection. The young lieutenant who authorized the arrest filed it as a routine operation, never bothering to verify the full identification logs. The higher officers on the bridge dismissed any questions about human retaliation. Primitive, they said, unorganized, no military worth mentioning. In their arrogance, they did not notice the faint, silent signals spreading through space, triggered the moment Marcus' biometric profile was scanned. Out in the dark, an ancient human reconnaissance network stirred. Dormant relays came alive. Encrypted bursts jumped from one deep space buoy to another, relaying a single message to human command. Asset hail compromised. Immediate alert. There was no panic, no loud mobilization, just quiet, deliberate preparation, invisible to Imperial sensors. Back on the carrier, Marcus' wife was escorted to a different section, her daughters to another. To the guards, this was a measure of control. To Marcus, it was an expected move and already accounted for. Through brief eye contact at the docking ramp, he had passed them instructions without speaking a word. The smallest tilted his head, the faintest movement of fingers, an old family code they had practiced during so-called camping trips. The daughters, appearing timid and frightened, carefully observed door locks, guard rotations, and the design of surveillance drones. Their mother memorized emergency hatches, power conduits, and panel seams. They were farmers to Imperial eyes. They were soldiers in disguise to anyone who looked deeper. Imperial interrogators began their work with casual detachment. Marcus was strapped into a restraint chair, subjected to scanning fields, chemical probes, and endless questions about human colonies and supply routes. He answered with slow shrugs or deliberate confusion, offering nothing but empty courtesy. The interrogators believed him to be a stubborn, but ultimately unimportant settler. They had no idea that every moment spent questioning him was a delay, and every delay was time humanity was using to assemble something far greater than a rescue mission. As the hours passed, Marcus cataloged their equipment, the placement of shock batons, the range of their hand weapons, the fail-safe codes they spoke to each other in half-whispered tones. He noted how the door locks emitted a soft click 2 seconds before opening, an audio cue of their encryption cycle. Even the ventilation shafts became part of his mental blueprint, mapped by the faint drafts of recycled air. The daughters, separated but unharmed, were questioned by bored junior officers. They pretended to weep, to flinch at shouted orders, to be what the Empire expected, fragile and frightened. In reality, they were learning. Every insult, every shove, every careless moment where a guard turned his back became a lesson. The wife remained calm, feigning exhaustion, listening closely for the rhythm of the ship's alarms, the distant rumble of engines transitioning to hyperspace. Meanwhile, far from the carrier, humanity moved in silence. Old allies dusted off emergency protocols. Black Ops cruisers left hidden docks without filing any flight paths. Listening stations adjusted their focus to trace Imperial fleet movements. It was not war yet, but preparations for something sharper, something colder than war. The Empire, still blind, recorded the arrest as a minor success. A board commander signed a routine transfer order to move the human prisoners deeper into Imperial space, where interrogations could continue at leisure. No one suspected that the man they had chained in their brig once commanded entire planetary campaigns. No one considered what would happen if his name and his capture ever reached human high command. The Imperial carrier glided through deep space, unaware that its hull was already whispering secrets to distant ears. Marcus Hale remained bound in a stark cell, expression unreadable, his heart rate steady as if he were resting at home. The interrogators returned daily with new chemical cocktails, new questions about human fleet deployments, but received only courteous silence or vague answers that revealed nothing. To them, it was a contest of endurance. To Marcus, it was reconnaissance. Every time they entered, he learned more. How many officers rotated per shift, which code phrases unlocked restraints, where they stored the stun batons when they grew careless. Their discipline was good, but not perfect. Perfect was a standard Marcus had long ago ceased expecting from anyone but himself. Elsewhere on the ship, his wife and daughters endured their own questioning. The mother feigned exhaustion and simple fear, her voice quavering just enough to reassure the guards that she posed no threat. The daughters played their roles well, pretending to be timid, breaking into tears on cue when officers barked at them. Behind the performance, they memorized patrol patterns, studied security drones, and took mental notes of which conduits vibrated with power flow, clues to the carrier systems. They noticed that the energy field sealing their quarters flickered slightly whenever the ship transitioned to hyperspace. They noticed that one guard favored his right leg and walked with predictable limp, slowing his corridor pass by 2 seconds. Every detail mattered. Beyond Imperial space, humanity was already moving. Intelligence channels lit up with encrypted bursts as the alert passed from covert relay to covert relay. The identification of Marcus Hale had reached human high command, and the response was immediate. No public declarations, no grand mobilization that sensors could detect. Only shadow fleets changing course, weapons checked in silence, stealth craft slipping from dockyards without broadcasting a signal. The Galactic Empire had no idea that their routine arrest was already being treated as an act of war. The carrier's junior officers grew uneasy. They sensed something unusual in their prisoner's calm. One whispered they had heard Hale's name before, buried in some old conflict file, but senior commanders dismissed the thought. All humans look alike, they said with thin smiles. He's no one important. Their arrogance blinded them to the pattern forming around them. System after system along their route began reporting sensor anomalies, phantom energy spikes, and unidentified objects trailing at extreme range. The Empire's analysts shrugged them off as cosmic noise. Marcus continued to work without moving from his cell. He communicated with his family, using nothing more than controlled breathing rhythms during brief escorts and the smallest gestures during forced exercise breaks. The code was old, practiced, and invisible to untrained eyes. Every member of the family now knew the approximate layout of their respective decks. They knew which locks were electronic and which still had manual overrides. They knew the timing of food deliveries, the way the guards carried their pulse rifles, and how long it took for emergency bulkheads to seal when an alarm was triggered. They were civilians only by appearance. In truth, they were an operation waiting to unfold. On the outside, the first human vessels shadowed the carrier. Sleek Black Ops corvettes drifted along at extreme sensor range, careful to avoid detection, mapping every move of the Imperial ship. Their job was not to attack yet, but to feed Marcus precise data through coded vibrations transmitted back along the carrier's hull, vibrations no Imperial scanner could read. Every tap of Marcus' finger against a restraint chair, every time knock against the bulkhead, when guards thought he was restless, was received by hidden drones. The man in the cell was not simply waiting for rescue. He was already commanding it. The Imperial interrogators grew frustrated. They increased chemical dosages, used neural induction fields, tried to shake him by threatening his wife and daughters. Marcus answered with the same calm eyes, the same deliberate non-answers. He never begged, never raged, never even appeared concerned. His stillness unnerved them more than defiance would have. In control rooms, some began to whisper that perhaps this prisoner was dangerous. Orders were drafted to transfer the family deeper into Imperial territory, to a fortified intelligence hub where no escape would be possible. The order would take days to reach the proper channels, days Marcus was already using. The daughters, outwardly fragile, had been left with small personal effects as a show of Imperial leniency. What the guards failed to realize was that even the simplest object could become a tool in practice hands. A hairpin became a probe for security seams. A thread from a blanket became a marker for airflow direction. The mother used her permitted food tray to test the strength of door seams, gently scraping corners to learn where metal met metal. These tiny acts of observation cost nothing and revealed everything. Marcus had trained them for this long before they were ever captured. Meanwhile, humanity's debate was brief but decisive. Some argued for negotiation to avoid open conflict with the Empire. Others insisted on immediate extraction, fearing Imperial torture would kill Marcus or his family. The decision came from the highest level. There would be no bargaining, not when one of humanity's most brilliant war leaders was in chains. The mission would be surgical, invisible, undeniable. The Empire would not even understand what had happened until it was too late. Back aboard the carrier, Marcus began the second phase of his plan. He seeded doubt among his captors. When a young guard complained about faulty door locks, Marcus, without looking up, murmured that he had heard the same click patter before, on another ship that vented its own crew by accident. When officers mocked human backwardness, Marcus chuckled softly, saying nothing, letting their imaginations do the work. A seed planted in uncertain minds can grow faster than any weapon. Soon rumors spread among the lower ranks. Maybe this man knew something about Imperial systems. Maybe he wasn't as helpless as he seemed. Tension on the carrier rose, but superiors dismissed it as nerves. Marcus also orchestrated a test. Using subtle signals passed through his daughters, he caused a minor distraction among alien prisoners on a different deck. The resulting scuffle forced security to redeploy, leaving one corridor unguarded for 13 seconds longer than usual. The event seemed random to the Empire, but Marcus took careful note of their response time, their alarm procedures, and how quickly they restored order. Every reaction was measured against his expectations, and every detail filed away for the breakout to come. Imperial intelligence finally received a partial data flag about Marcus Hale's identity, but bureaucracy slowed its recognition. Files buried under layers of classified human war records required decryption, verification, and cross-referencing. By the time analysts confirmed that the man in their brig was not a farmer, but a legendary general, the information was still climbing the ladder to reach someone with authority to act. The moment Imperial Command confirmed Marcus Hale's identity, panic set in. The report climbed the chain too slowly, but when it reached the right eyes, the carrier was already en route to the rendezvous point. Hushed messages ordered additional escorts, security upgrades, and immediate preparations for a high-level interrogation. None of it mattered. Marcus had already set the schedule, and humanity had already closed its net. In his cell, Marcus slowed his breathing, counting down in his head. The vibration of the carrier's drive shifted subtly. An acceleration burned to align with the incoming warship. The Empire thought it was tightening its grip. In reality, it was placing every critical system in predictable motion. Through faint knocks against the wall, Marcus confirmed to his unseen allies that the timing was locked. The operation would unfold with mathematical precision. Outside, in the deep void where Imperial sensors saw only empty darkness, human stealth ships drifted like ghosts. Their weapons were armed, their targeting data exact to the centimeter. No warnings, no chatter, no visible power signatures betrayed their presence. These were not the proud battle fleets the Empire expected from primitive humans. These were scalpel blades honed for silent war, waiting for a hail signal. Inside the carrier, the daughters kept up their performance as frightened captives, but their eyes tracked every guard movement, every passing maintenance drone. The mother kept her voice weak and compliant during questioning, but when a sympathetic technician left a tools pouch unattended near a bulkhead, she shifted a single bolt in its casing just enough to test whether the lock had an old-fashioned manual override. It did. Small discoveries like these mapped the ship's vulnerabilities better than any blueprint. Marcus gave his signal with nothing more than a pattern of taps on the floor, a rhythm too steady to be nervous fidgeting. The drones following the carrier caught the vibrations instantly and transmitted them to the waiting human fleet. The countdown began. When the first strike came, it was not a barrage of missiles or lasers. It was silence. Imperial sensors went dark in a single synchronized blackout, disabled by precision EMP pulses from beyond visual range. The carrier's communications failed before anyone could send an alert. Lights flickered, gravity fluctuated, and security systems froze in mid-cycle. In that heartbeat of confusion, Marcus moved. The restraint chair that had held him for days became a weapon. He twisted his wrist in the momentary loss of power to the binding fields, snapping the magnetic locks with strength born from perfect timing rather than brute force. He crossed the cell in 2 steps, pried open an inspection panel he'd already identified as weak, and triggered a localized short. The door slid open without resistance. Guards came running, shouting orders that no longer reached their comms, but Marcus was already 3 moves ahead. He disarmed the first man with precise strike, dropping him silently, and used the stun baton against the second. By the time the lights came back to full power, Marcus was gone, moving through the corridors like a shadow. Elsewhere, his wife and daughters acted in perfect sync. The hairpin and thread tricks they had practiced were no longer games. They were the tools to force open their own cell doors during the power fluctuation. They moved quickly and without hesitation, slipping into maintenance shafts where drones had already marked safe routes. Every step was coordinated without words, guided by Marcus' pre-planned timing. The Imperial crew struggled to recover. Emergency lights glared red as alarms screamed to the corridors, but those alarms only added to the chaos. Officers yelled for lockdown procedures that no longer functioned. The internal security AI tried to isolate compartments, but its commands were being jammed by human infiltration teams cutting their way into the carrier systems from outside. Marines in black combat armor boarded through maintenance ports with surgical efficiency, disabling defenses instead of destroying them. They were silent, faceless, methodical. No war cries, no wasted fire, only cold precision. Marcus reached the detention sector, where his family regrouped exactly on schedule. Not a word passed between them, as they armed themselves with capture weapons. The mother checked her daughters for injuries in a single glance and nodded once. This was not a rescue led from outside. This was a breakout guided from within, with external support only ensuring the path stayed clear. By the time Imperial officers realized what was happening, Marcus already had control of key systems. The carrier's bridge door sealed, not against the intruders, but against its own crew, human operatives. Following Hale's transmitted data, breached the command deck without killing anyone unnecessarily. In less than a minute, Imperial command staff were pinned to the floor, their weapons removed, their communications still dead. Marcus stepped onto the bridge, calm as ever, a man who looked more like a farmer than the most dangerous strategist alive. He broadcast one message across the ship on an open frequency, his voice cold and clear. "This is Marcus Hale of the Human Defense Directorate. You have taken my family. You have insulted my people. Let this be your first and last lesson. Humans do not forgive." Outside, the human fleet appeared on Imperial sensors for the first time, but only after they had already won. Black Ops cruisers had crippled the carrier's escorts with precision strikes to engines and weapons, leaving every Imperial ship adrift but intact. No one was dead unless they resisted violently. The ruthlessness of the operation lay not in its destruction, but in its perfection. Imperial High Command sent desperate orders to save face, but Marcus ignored them. He instructed the boarding teams to strip the carrier of all intelligence, neutralize every weapon system, and leave the ship powerless. The Empire would have its vessel back, but gutted, humiliated, a symbol of failure. Marcus personally escorted his family to the extraction craft waiting in the hangar bay. The daughters walked like veterans rather than rescued civilians. The mother showed no fear, only pride. When the human strike teams withdrew, they left the carrier adrift, its crew alive but shamed. Before departure, Marcus sent one final encrypted burst through the ship's own communications array, a message to the entire Empire. "Touch a human family again, and you will not find us as merciful." As the extraction craft vanished into hyperspace, Imperial officers watched helplessly, knowing they could do nothing. No pursuit would catch them. No retaliation would land without igniting a war they were not ready to fight. They had underestimated humanity, and worse, they had underestimated Marcus Hale.